everybody, what's up? This is Hold the Truth Hostage, where if the truth was so important, we would hold the truth hostage. Now, in this video, I'm gonna be talking about Marvel and DC and how they're really affecting the comic book industry and how a lot of people on YouTube and on the internet talking about Marvel and DC when it comes to the comic aspect are failing to understand that. And I'm not saying it's wrong to cover any video about Marvel and DC, when it comes to comic book industry. The problem is people covering Marvel and DC as though they're a comic book first company. A lot of people need to understand that Marvel and DC, in all honesty, as comic book companies, they failed. They failed. Marvel is owned by Disney now. DC is owned by Warner Brothers, which is owned by AT&T. They're not comic book companies anymore. And that's why when a lot of people, I watch a lot of videos when people are talking about Marvel and DC or, they're ruining the industry, they're this, they're that. I'm not saying you don't cover it, but to talk like they're basically comics first, as though when they make a product, their intention and what they care about, quality, is comic books. They're not living off of their comics. In all honesty, when they talk about the SJW, the PC culture and all that stuff in the comics, you have to understand Marvel and DC are now just branches of a bigger entertainment company. Disney doesn't lose any sleep, doesn't lose any money when it comes to what Marvel comics aren't selling or how much money's being lost, with the comics they're creating. Same rule for DC, with what happens to their comics they're selling or they're pitching. They don't lose any sleep, they don't lose any money over it because those are just smaller branches. You're Disney, you got roller coasters, you got film production studios, you have video games, you have so many bigger things and bigger branches that cost far more money. Same rule for Warner Brothers. You got TV networks, you have video game companies you own. I mean, AT&T owns them, so them losing a couple million for comics and so on, it's nothing. In all honesty, Marvel and DC, Disney uses Marvel to just pump out some agenda. They're using that to pump out some agenda. And let's be honest here, even before Disney bought Marvel, comic sales were at an all-time low. You're selling 50,000 of a comic, while a book and novels are selling over 50,000, 100,000 copies at triple the price. Then you got music selling MP3s, selling singles at $1 and selling millions. The comic industry was in a downward spiral for years. I'd say decades. Same rule applies to DC. So when it comes to them applying some agenda, be it turning a character's race, changing a character's, sexuality, it's all to sell and manipulate. And the biggest thing they win when a lot of YouTubers cover, for example, what was that new book, The Warriors, where they made a character called Safe Space and all that. You're actually spreading, their agenda, because you're basically saying, well, look, The face of comics is what Marvel and DC are doing. Two companies that no longer specialize in comics anymore. They no longer do. And the honest truth is this: Disney and DC have enough scripts. They got enough scripts from over 80 years to never touch or care about the new comics that are coming up. You know what I mean? They have enough scripts from X-Men for over 80 years, or, to produce their films, their TV shows. They can even reference the cartoon series from the 90s. They got enough content from the comics to never, ever touch the new stuff. Never. So when I watch all these YouTubers, look, Marvel did this new comic, and all comics are SJW, agenda filled, and look what this DC's doing, all agenda filled and all it. Dude, they no longer represent the comic book industry. The companies you have to look at are Image Comics, Dark Horse, Boom, IDW. You gotta look at comic first companies where they're not a branch. Their whole company is a comic. Now I know some people gonna say, but Image Comics has TV shows. Yeah, Image Comics licenses out their comics to TV production, Netflix, and so on to produce series. They're not owned by TV first entertainment company. They license out their properties. They're the ones that are shaping and molding the industry. You watch a lot of YouTube, they make it look like there's no good comics coming out at all. Like there's no quality comics worth buying. It's all SJW because they only cover Marvel and DC. And what this does is this actually does far more damage. It paints the picture that when you go buy comics, there's only two brands in the store shelves you could buy. And another thing is they're ignoring the guys that have a fundraiser, the people that have fundraisers on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, the new indie companies that pop out that are telling some great stories and selling some new characters and new series. The biggest amount of damage, and it confirms to Marvel and Disney, is that no matter what we do, we're the priority. People are more fixated and more focused on us repackaging and reselling the same series. I mean, how many times does Jean Grey have to die in the X-Men and be reborn? How many times you gotta retell the same cast? I mean, they can't even come up with new characters anymore. Wolverine's son, Wolverine's daughter, Wolverine's half-son, Wolverine's this, Wolverine's that. Look, sidekicks with the same powers. Those companies are doomed, man. Marvel and DC are just, in all honesty, well, DC has some good, one thing I give DC, they're still telling some good Batman scripts, Batman stories. But even in Batman, I mean, how many times, the biggest blunder they had was when Darkseid zapped Batman and it somehow took him around, time. In all honesty, and then you have Nightwing become Batman instead of keeping him as Nightwing. And now it's, so when readers are reading it like, oh, wow, it's just Nightwing and Robin. You know what I mean? Because Dick, he abandoned and never wanted to be Batman. So instead you just have him turn to Batman, but that's another story, But in all honesty, man, it's hurting the industry. It's hurting the industry when all you do is focus on two companies that don't give a damn. They don't even care about comics anymore. That's the last thing on their mind. I mean, Marvel did a deal with Square Enix for the new Marvel game. That's what they care about. They don't care about comics. In all honesty, it's because of Marvel and DC comics are in the position they're in. Now, you could You could look this up when you get the chance. Back in the, I think it was back in the 40s, or 50s, I think it was the 40s, a mad psychiatrist who wanted to blame comics for deviancy and violence because they were selling millions of issues. And it turns out that certain kids who were ruffians or kids who were going to jail were also buying comics, and he blamed it on them. Just like the video game industry is getting a lot of heat. But one thing I give the video game industry has some balls. They stood up and said, yo, you have violent films and you have violent novels and so on. You can't just come at us saying we're increasing violence. Comic industry, DC and Marvel, and the majority of the big companies back then backed down, bent on one knee and gave up. And a lot of comics were burned. They didn't stand up for it in the industry. DC and Marvel have always been the issue, and a lot of big companies back then been the issue. Then you fast forward to I think it was the 60s, where magazine prices went up. So the magazine vendors were like, your comic book prices need to go up. We can't keep selling comics at 5 cents. When we order them, it costs far more than that. We're not making any money. The magazine prices went up to $1 and so on. You know what I mean? DC and Marvel didn't want to increase the price. So what they did, they cut the page count. There was more than 24 pages, 32 pages in a comic. Comic was the size of a magazine. So what DC and Marvel did, they cut the price. They didn't want to stay and follow the magazine price. And a lot of magazine locations, supermarkets abandoned the comic book industry because the price was too low. They weren't making their money back. The newsstands. So you had specialty stores made, but these specialty stores, a lot of people act like the comic book stores have been selling like gangbusters forever. No, the thing is this: when you have a specialty store, or I forget the proper word right now, like a comic book store. It would help if you had, for example, Marvel had Marvel Magazine on every store and supermarket. But if you just wanted Iron Man, you would go to the comic book stores. It wasn't your only option. And the problem with a comic book shop is that usually there's one comic book shop 3-4 towns away, or one town. It's not that many, you know what I mean? There's not that many comic book shops to begin with. And comic book shops would have been in more business if you had your introduction to comic book stores. You go to your 7-Eleven, there's some comics there. A magazine by Marvel that's updated, maybe weekly it's updated, And then you want the comics for just a character, you go to a novelty shop like a comic book store. It would have helped the comic book stores stay at a good point, because when you want more comics and you want to follow your character more, you jump into the comic book store. Marvel and DC was, what is it? Marvel was bought by Disney in 2008. DC went bankrupt. They're failures, man. Marvel and DC are failures. You know what I'm saying? And to me, when you watch YouTube, all they do is talk about Marvel, DC, Marvel, DC. Like they're the only ones pumping out comic books. They're the only ones creating. And the thing is, they're not even priority. Look at a story like The Boys. Comic from Boom Studios. These companies that are comic book first companies, they're the ones that deserve attention. You know what I mean? And the creators, the indie guys pumping out new comics. To me, it just shows that, and it only displays and celebrates the failure of DC and Marvel, because you don't see that many videos on YouTube. Oh man, a new comic by Image Comics, a new comic by this company, Devil Do, new comic by this. Look at this new great new. No, it's just people complaining about not getting enough recycled, predictable material. That's usually what it is. Just people complain. We don't have a new X-Men, new recycled material. You know what I mean? It ain't helping the industry that you're celebrating two big companies. You saw what DC did with Batwoman, where they disrespected the Batman fans by she's saying, well, you know, the Batman suit hasn't been good until a woman wore it. That means all you people that have been fans of Batman, you're horrible and you've been following a failure. You know what I'm saying? So my thing is this, man. DC and Marvel, the last thing they could care about when it comes to is their sales. They just love the agenda they're selling, the rage of you know, so many fake fictional comic book fans that all you do is upload negative videos and displaying. I'm not saying you don't talk about Marvel and DC, but at least talk about the good. Talk about the new comics that are coming out by new creators that's of quality. All you're doing when you advertise DC and Marvel like it's them or nothing, that's all we have when there's literally a billion comics. You know, if it's traditional, you know, you got the comic book stores with indie creators, you got your Indiegogos, your Kickstarters, you got Webtoons, you got Tapas. There's so many other alternatives to comics. Like I follow, been in talks with. You got Pocket Jacks Comics. You know, you have Tim Lynn's comics. You know, Kame America. You got so many other books that are being released and created of quality. And the other thing is this: if you're in such a need of recycled material, there's a lot of indie guys that, in my honest opinion, that are creating replicas. Like their characters are clearly replicas of the X-Men or 80s or 90s type of comics, Golden Age. There's still good quality books out there if you're a fan. You're looking for a clone, you're looking for a good Captain America fan, there's the Fighting. You're looking for a good Captain America comic book, there's the Fighting American. There's so many characters and books being released that could be what I call a generic brand or you know, flat out, you know, copies or heavily inspired. It's not that there's not good comics out there. It's just that you want to admit that the only thing that ever mattered to you was Marvel and DC. And the other thing is some of these people complaining, you could clearly tell they don't even buy comics. They're just here to make big news and all that, man. I'm not saying you don't cover Marvel and DC, but you have to. If you're such a fan and care about the industry, at least showcase the people putting out quality material, quality comics. You know what I mean? There's so many sites, Webtoons, you got so many indie guys pumping out books on Comixology. Even got my own website. We pumping out some comics, comangallc.com, you know, but there's a lot of quality books being put out there, but people are complaining that they don't have enough recycled material. Like you want to read how Wolverine died for the 50th time and came back to life. You know, it just proves to these corporations that we can do whatever we want because they place the recycled material over everything. And another thing is this, man, and I covered this on a video. Their whole diversity thing, it's all a lie. I'll give you an example. You got Miles Morales. Okay, Miles Morales worked, you know, as a new Spider-Man, but he could have been his own character. He could have not had nothing to do with Spider-Man besides how he got his power. He could have been, for example, you know, the webbed, you know, the web vault or something. He could have been a whole new character. But instead, and this is what a lot of the major companies do where they race swap and all that, they're basically saying the only time you can have a minority character is when this character is based off of our original and white character. That's what a lot of these big companies are doing, where they swap the sex or gender like they did with Iceman. I mean, Iceman was in Spider-Man and Amazing Friends. Iceman been dating women for years, but so we can it's not even to virtue signal. It's basically for your characters to matter. For example, Marvel and Disney are saying for a gay character to matter, it has to be based on one of our characters first. That's what they're basically saying. And for a black character to matter, it had to be based on a white character first or one of our original characters. For a female character matter, it's all about giving a character crumbs. You know what I mean? Peter or for example, Miles Morales, people gonna love him as Spider-Man and all that, but he's really just marketing and promotion for the original Spider-Man. You know what I mean? He's crumbs. If DC and Marvel really cared about, diversity, they would have hired and would have, bought or actually agreed to publish new talent from original characters. They wouldn't just be, oh, look, we made Spider-Man black. Look, we made Superman black and look like Barack Obama. You know what I mean? It's false diversity, man. And for example, DC had the license for Static Shock. Great, had an anime hit series. They never released a new, and when they did in '04, it was horrible. Garbage comic in 2010. Where's the Static Shock series? Who asked for Black Lightning? No one. No one asked for Black Lightning, but it was a character they created, and it can only be one they created, and I mean, come on, Black Lightning. Garbage. You know what I'm saying? The name, it was trash. Nobody asked for Black Lightning. People wanted Static Shock. You know what I mean? They doing all this sex swaps and all that. They're basically saying, and the thing is this, a lot of the gay community and, you know what I'm saying, the LGBTQ plus community has their own comics. They have their own products. But DC, Marvel, the big companies are basically saying, because they don't want to lose money to anyone, they're basically saying none of your LGBTQ plus, none of that matters if we didn't make it first and if it isn't based off of our series. That's what they're doing. Same rule for minorities. That new black series you got doesn't matter unless it's based on one of our series. You know, they turned the Hulk to a Chinese man. You know what I'm saying? Instead of just making a new character, or contacting or looking for a writer of Asian descent. If you want it to be so authentic, you will contact one of them and say, yo, we need you, or look at a series that's succeeding and incorporate it into the Marvel universe, or just publish. There's a lot of, when it comes to the big companies, even IDW, a lot of the bigger companies, they're all using this. They're not virtue signal. They don't have any good intent. Their whole intent is, can we get the money and influence? There have been gay comics and LGBTQ comic books for over 10 years. They got their own books. But Marvel, DC, the big companies are basically spitting on them by saying, until we make it, yours does not count. And they're trying to squeeze all the money out. And another thing they're creating, and another thing they're doing is they're making the LGBTQ, plus community look like they're so narrow-minded that they can't like any character that isn't of their sexuality. They're selling this fake narrative, man. It's got a lot of the YouTubers, man. If you really like comics and so on, you understand you could touch on Marvel, they messed up, but you're only echoing that their influence on the industry is still absolute. They're still the number one company and all that. When in reality, even if Marvel and DC own 40% of the market, it's ownership by companies that they don't make comic books first. That's not their priority. That's not why they're there for. It's just there to occupy space. You know what I mean? All the new Marvel, DC comics, for the most part, they're just there to occupy space. You know what I mean? It's got nothing to do with their quality. It's there to occupy space. It's the cheapest way to sell your agenda, through comics. You know, some pieces of paper that are drawn. It's cheaper and more affordable to do that than to, sell an agenda only on TV shows and films. You know, so all I'm saying is, man, if you really like comics and so on, cover, for example, you got The Boys that came out on Amazon. Even as you could see, and that's the thing, I spoke to a buddy of mine. The biggest thing is that, when Netflix dropped the whole Marvel products, is that a lot of people don't get is that Netflix actually succeeded by making darker, edgier characters like the Punisher, Daredevil into TV. You think Disney would ever do that? Disney's whole goal has been the PG-13, their whole series. I mean, what is it? They're even struggling now to release a new Deadpool film. You know what I mean? Because Disney don't want to do it. And now Netflix is doing films and series from other comics. What they did with Marvel, and a lot of people don't get what Netflix did, even if they canceled this series, is that Netflix said, look, we will do it. They won't. And it don't matter. Look how we made The Punisher popular and made it serious. We did it. They use Marvel to display that we can do it. And now they're doing it with other series like Lock and Key and other comic book series or books and novels and so on. Marvel and DC, and to me, I don't even really care about them. No, it's too predictable. They've messed up. I'm gonna do a video on, and I did this over 4 years ago, but they're actually following what I said. I said this over 4 years ago, that a Batman Beyond film should be made, that DC's new age heroes was Batman Beyond, Static Shock, Blue Beetle. They represented the new young blood. You know what I mean? And now they're making a film, and I said this years ago should have been done. So, I'm gonna make another video when it comes to the comic side. All I'm saying is, man, if you're really a comic book fan, at least cover companies that only make comics, that exclusively make comics and actually care about their comics, versus DC and Marvel that are designed to just occupy space, to just say, look, we still sell comics. Even though they're filled with agenda, we've swapped out their race, we've swapped out their sexuality, because a big agenda they're pushing now is that race and sexuality is a narrative. You know what I mean? You shouldn't look at or question it. Why we just turned Iceman gay? It's part of its narrative. His sexuality is narrative. Why we just turned this Captain America? Why we turned Falcon into the new Captain America when he should have just stayed Falcon, but honored Captain America with that cool new costume? And why is he using Captain America's shield when you need to be stronger than any normal human to use it? Why is Thor turned to a female when we could have gave her own powers and be nothing like Thor? Dude, it is all to sell their agenda. And the longer more YouTubers, bitch and moan, look what Marvel did. Look what companies that have nothing to do with comics anymore other than to just occupy space and push an agenda. Come on. All right, this has been Hold the Truth Hostage. where we hold the truth hostage and don't negotiate with lies. Have a good one.